The room next to mine, Chapter 9. We had to sleep naked in the sleeping bag for warmth. Jack was still in shock over how James had come home fully soaked, teeth chattering, clothes plastered to his skin. He'd tried everything, rubbing his arms, massaging his toes, but nothing worked. One thought kept coming back to him, an old survival tip he'd read somewhere: shared body heat. He looked James in the eyes. I read once that in bad cases, skin-to-skin contact in a sleeping bag is the fastest way to warm someone up. James's eyes were unfocused, but fierce. I don't care what you do. Just, please, warm me. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed the sleeping bag from his wardrobe, unzipped it wide across the bed. His own clothes came off in a blur. The room felt colder by the second. He helped James wriggle out of his soaked jeans and boxers, never once letting his gaze linger too long. Then Jack climbed in, pulling James into his chest. He zipped the bag up around them, sealing their naked bodies in the narrow space. For a second, they both gasped at the shock of cold skin meeting cold skin. Then Jack wrapped his arms tightly around James, legs tangling, every inch of them pressing close. "Breathe with me," Jack whispered at James's temple, voice shaking. "Stay awake. Just breathe." James's shivers came harder at first, then slower. Jack felt each tremor through his own chest. He rubbed circles into James's back, pressed warm breaths into his hair. Minutes passed like hours. Gradually, James's breathing deepened. His skin lost that terrifying icy edge. He curled into Jack, clinging tight. Their bodies fitted so close it felt like nothing could come between them. Jack held him, forehead pressed to James's, whispering over and over, "I've got you. I'm here. I've got you." Outside, the storm still raged. Inside the sleeping bag there was only their heat, their breath, their hearts, beating steady and strong together. Morning light trickled in, soft and gold through the thin curtains. Inside the sleeping bag, Jack woke first. He was impossibly warm, sunk in heat and the soft weight of James draped over him. Their legs were tangled. James's head rested just below Jack's chin, breaths slow and even. Jack shifted slightly, only to realize every move rubbed bare skin against bare skin. James stirred, let out a small, sleepy groan, then froze. Their eyes snapped open at the same time, faces inches apart. "Morning," Jack said, voice low and husky. James's face turned crimson. "Morning." He squirmed, trying to slip away, but every shift only made them slide closer together, heat sparking between them. "Careful," Jack teased with a wicked grin. "One more wiggle and you're gonna owe me breakfast." James's jaw dropped. "That's not—" "I wasn't," Jack chuckled, hair falling into his eyes. "Just saying, you keep moving like that and I'll start thinking you're doing it on purpose." James groaned, burying his face in Jack's chest. "You're impossible." "Yeah," Jack murmured, lips brushing James's hair, "but you love it." James tried to glare, but his cheeks stayed bright pink. "Shut up." Jack smirked, reaching for the zipper. "Ready? On 3. They counted down together, 1, 2, 3, and unzipped the bag in a rush of cold morning air. They both gasped at the chill, scrambling awkwardly for their clothes, bumping into each other as they pulled on shirts and trackies, laughter bubbling out between shivers. "Nice arse," Jack teased, as James bent to grab his hoodie. James whipped around, eyes wide. "Jack!" Jack just grinned, tossing him the hoodie. "What? Can't compliment my flatmate?" James shoved him lightly, but couldn't hide his smile. "Come on," Jack said, voice softening, brushing a thumb over James's flushed cheek. "Let's get coffee." And side by side, warm, breathless, still teasing, they padded into the kitchen, leaving the sleeping bag rumpled and empty behind them. Later that morning, they sat shoulder to shoulder at the bench top, mugs of coffee warming their hands. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight slipped between clouds, spilling gold across the small kitchen. Jack caught James watching him over the rim of his mug. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" James hesitated, then just shook his head with a soft smile. "Nothing." Jack grinned, nudging his foot under the table. "Good, because I was going to say, I'm not going anywhere." James's eyes flickered, something warm and bright there. "Neither am I." For a quiet moment, everything felt still. Safe. Right. They didn't know what came next, but for the first time, the unknown felt like something to look forward to, together. James Winter had settled deep over the city, turning every breath into mist and the flat into an icebox. James couldn't remember the last time he'd woken up warm. Nights were long, teeth chattering, and even layers of blankets felt useless. He stood outside Jack's bedroom door, shivering in just his boxers, hesitating. They'd shared the bed before, out of necessity, out of comfort. Jack never made it weird. But tonight felt different. He opened the door quietly. Jack was already half asleep, curled on his side under a heavy doona, bare-chested, the line of his back catching the faint light from the hall. The cold had made closeness less a choice than a need. A quiet, unspoken agreement. "You coming in?" Jack mumbled, voice rough with sleep, eyes barely open. "Yeah," James whispered. He slipped under the covers, his cold skin jolting at the first brush of Jack's warm body. He let out a small hiss he couldn't hide. But careful didn't matter. Skin met skin in brief, shivering touches, cold toes brushing calves, chilled hands grazing Jack's ribs. The heat spreading between them was immediate. Real. Unavoidable. James squeezed his eyes shut, praying his shaking didn't give him away. Jackie wasn't asleep. Not really. He'd felt James slip into bed, cautious, breath-catching, like he always did. But tonight, something was different. Every shift brought them closer. Jack didn't move away. Couldn't. The need for warmth had shifted into something else entirely. He could feel James's chest pressed to his back, every shaky breath radiating heat, the shape of James's legs sliding against his own, the quiet tremble of James's hands, and the heartbeat, fast, unsteady, alive. Jack stayed perfectly still, every muscle thrumming with awareness. When James shifted again, tucking himself flush against Jack's bare back, Jack exhaled, a shaky, quiet breath like letting go of something he'd been holding in for too long. He wanted to whisper, "Is this what you want?" But silence felt safer. Warmer. She couldn't sleep. Not with the solid heat of Jack's skin so close, not with every small shift lighting a slow burn beneath his ribs. He wanted to move, to roll over, to say something, anything. But instead, he stayed frozen, terrified a word might break everything. Or worse, invite something he wasn't sure he could handle. Yet even in the stillness, he found himself leaning in, his chest pressed closer to Jack's back, his lips nearly brushing Jack's shoulder. When James shifted again, tucking himself flush against Jack's back, Jack exhaled, a shaky, quiet breath like he was letting go of something he'd been holding in for too long. Jack's hand found James's arm where it wrapped around his waist, his fingers curling lightly over James's wrist. A silent agreement, a quiet invitation. James let out a shaky exhale. He didn't pull away. Slowly, carefully, Jack shifted in the bed, nudging James with a gentle hand at his hip. James stirred, and with a quiet, sleepy sound, let himself be guided. Together they rolled until James's back pressed snugly against Jack's chest, the quilt settling around them, close and warm. Jack. The soft exhale from James was everything. It wasn't loud, barely even audible, but Jack felt it. Felt it in the way James's back melted into him, in the way his own hand, resting at James's waist, suddenly felt heavier, more meaningful. He hadn't meant to touch him like that. Not really. But now that he had, it felt like a line had shifted, ever so slightly, and neither of them was rushing to redraw it. Jack let his hand stay there. Still, barely touching, but present. The air between them was thick with heat, not the stifling kind of summer warmth, but something deeper, denser. He closed his eyes, listening to James breathe. One inhale, one exhale. He could feel it. Count it. James's heart was still racing. Jack didn't know what it meant, only that it echoed in his own chest like a question he couldn't name. James's skin buzzed beneath Jack's hand. Every part of him was awake now. But he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't speak. Instead, he focused on the shape of Jack's fingers against him, the warmth of his breath near the back of his neck. Was this just comfort? Was it something else? And if it was, did that scare him or thrill him? He shifted slightly, pressing back just enough for Jack's chest to meet his shoulder blades fully. Jack didn't pull away. He felt steady, safe. James swallowed, throat dry. He didn't know how to think, only that he didn't want to leave this bed. Not tonight. Not if it meant losing whatever this was becoming. Jack, that tiny shift, James pressing back, nearly undid him. His breath hitched, and for a moment he almost said his name. James. But what would follow? He didn't even know how to explain what this was. It wasn't just heat, it wasn't just the bed, or the night, or the way their skin pressed together. It was how right it felt, and how terrifying that truth was. He moved closer still, letting his forehead rest gently at the back of James's neck. He exhaled a long, quiet breath. James didn't move, didn't say a word. But Jack felt it, a tiny, barely there sigh that sounded like relief. They didn't speak. But in that silence, their bodies settled into each other with a kind of aching ease, like they'd done this 1,000 times in another life. And when sleep finally took them, they stayed wrapped together, skin to skin, breath to breath, nothing between them but everything unsaid. James, the first thing he felt was warmth. Not the sun, not the stale heat of old radiators, but something heavier, more alive. Jack, still curled around him, bare skin against bare skin, chest pressed gently to his back. James didn't open his eyes right away. He let himself lie there, soaking in the feel of it. The comfort, the quiet, the weight of Jack's arm draped across his waist like it belonged there. He didn't want to move. But his heart had started its nervous rhythm again, and he knew eventually one of them would have to shift. Say something. Pretend it didn't mean what it meant. Or admit that it did. He let out a slow breath, trying to sound casual, though nothing about this moment felt casual. Behind him, Jack stirred. Jack, he was already half awake, pretending not to be. Morning light slipped through the curtains in pale slants, catching dust motes in soft gold. But all Jack could focus on was the solid warmth of James in his arms. Neither of them had moved all night. Jack kept his breathing steady, hoping James hadn't noticed how tightly he'd been holding him. Then James exhaled, a quiet, real breath, and Jack knew he was awake too. His arm tensed instinctively, like it wanted to pull James closer, just for a minute longer. But he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "You awake?" A pause, then a soft hum. "Yeah." No one moved. The silence felt fragile, like something delicate rested between them, and neither wanted to break it. James, he finally turned slowly to face Jack, the sheet slipping a little, not that either of them noticed. Jack looked sleep-soft and nervous. So did he. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, not smiling, not speaking, just searching. "I didn't mean to fall asleep like that," James murmured, voice quiet and raw. Jack didn't look away. "I'm glad you did." The words hung there, unguarded. James's eyes flicked to Jack's mouth, just for a second before he caught himself and looked away, heart thudding hard. Jack saw it, but said nothing. Instead, he reached for the sheet and handed it over with a quiet smirk. "You want that, or—" James laughed under his breath, grabbing the sheet and tugging it up to his chest. "Shut up." But his smile stayed, and so did Jack's. Jack couldn't help the grin spreading across his face as James clutched the sheet like it was the last barrier between him and complete exposure. Which, to be fair, it kind of was. "You know," Jack said, stretching his arms above his head with exaggerated nonchalance, "for someone who spent the night completely naked, you're suddenly very modest." James rolled his eyes, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "Yeah, well, I was asleep. Now I'm awake. Big difference." Jack propped himself up on one elbow, smirking. "So conscious James is shy, but unconscious James is a cuddler? Good to know." James groaned, burying his face in the sheet. "Please don't analyze my sleep behavior." Jack leaned in, voice teasing but soft. "You did back right into me like a spoon-seeking missile." James peeked out just enough to glare. "I hate you." "You don't," Jack said easily, adding with a wink. "Not after last night." James flushed crimson, tossing a pillow at him. Jack caught it and laughed. A real, open laugh that echoed through the small room like something important had just shifted between them. The air still hummed with the weight of the unspoken, but for a few minutes it was wrapped in warmth instead of nerves. They eventually pulled themselves out of bed, reluctantly, awkwardly, smiling more than either of them cared to admit. James disappeared into his room, with the sheet still clutched around his waist like a robe of honor, muttering something about needing privacy and dignity. Jack just chuckled and made his way to the tiny kitchen, pulling open cupboards, searching for eggs, coffee, anything vaguely edible. By the time James emerged, now dressed, hair still damp and flopping into his eyes, Jack had 2 mugs steaming on the bench and a pan sizzling softly. "Smells good," James said, voice low and still a bit hoarse from sleep. Jack glanced over his shoulder. "Eggs and toast. Not exactly gourmet, but I figured after all that dramatic spooning, we earned it." James smirked, sliding onto one of the stools at the bench. "You're never letting that go, are you?" "Absolutely not." They shared a look, a pause, then Jack turned back to the stove, hiding the soft smile threatening at the corners of his mouth. The silence between them was easier now, less fragile, more settled. Jack placed a plate in front of James, their fingers brushing for just a moment, enough to make both of them still for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Thanks," James said quietly. Jack met his eyes, voice just as soft. "You're welcome." They ate in companionable silence, the gentle clink of forks and the low hum of distant music from someone's window drifting in through the quiet flat. And even though nothing more was said, both of them knew something had shifted. Not rushed, not forced, but real, and quietly growing. Jack was passing the bathroom when he saw James standing there, bare except for the towel he held loosely in one hand, running it slowly through his damp hair. The steam still clung to the air, softening the light and blurring the sharp edges of the room. James caught Jack's eyes and held them. A heartbeat passed, then another. Jack's breath stuttered. His feet carried him forward before he decided to move, until he stood just inside the bathroom doorway. He reached out, hand trembling as he tucked a wet strand of hair behind James's ear. James's pulse raced. His chest rose and fell unevenly. His eyes flicked between Jack's eyes and mouth. And then Jack leaned in. Their lips met softly, hesitantly. A warm press, delicate but electric. For a suspended moment, everything else disappeared. Only the quiet thud of their hearts and the faint drip of water in the sink remained. When they pulled back, their eyes stayed locked. Jack's voice cracked the silence, low and uncertain. James blinked, cheeks flushed a deep, blooming pink. He bit his lip, breath catching. "I didn't expect that." The small room felt suddenly too close, the air thick with something raw and new. Jack let out a shaky laugh, relief and fear swirling together. "Me neither." He cleared his throat. "Maybe we should sit down." James glanced down at himself, then back up, face redder than ever. Can I put on clothes first?" he asked, voice small but teasing, as if just realizing he was still standing stark naked under Jack's gaze. Jack's eyes widened as it hit him, ears turning pink. "Oh, yeah, he stammered, stepping back quickly. "I'll wait out there." As Jack retreated, James couldn't stop the tiny laugh that bubbled up. Light, nervous, but genuine. They were both still breathless. But now, the space between them felt warmer, safer, like something had cracked open, letting the truth finally spill through. A few minutes later, James emerged from his room wearing trackies and an old hoodie, hair still damp but pushed back from his face. His eyes flicked up to find Jack pacing near the couch. They met each other's gaze, and both looked away, smiling awkwardly. Jack cleared his throat. "So?" They sat down side by side on the couch. A careful gap remained between them, but their knees almost touched. James picked at the cuff of his sleeve. "That was our first kiss." Jack let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Yeah, it was." Silence stretched, but it was gentle, not heavy. James spoke first, voice low and uncertain. "I didn't think this was where we were headed." Jack's brow furrowed, eyes fixed on James's hands. "Neither did I, but I don't want it to stop." James's breath caught. He looked up, eyes shining with something unguarded. "Me neither." Their hands drifted closer, until their pinkies brushed, a tiny electric contact. Neither pulled away. The room felt warmer, brighter. Like, for the first time, they could see what might come next. Their pinkies still brushed when James finally cracked a small grin. "So, are you always this smooth after a kiss?" Jack snorted, cheeks going pink. "Smooth? You're the one who was standing starkers in the bathroom. I should be asking if you're always this prepared." James let out an incredulous laugh, lightly shoving Jack's shoulder. "Prepared? I nearly died of embarrassment, mate." Jack smirked, leaning back just enough to catch James's eye. "Could have fooled me. You looked pretty confident." "Oh, piss off." James rolled his eyes, but his smile didn't fade. He pulled his hoodie tighter around himself, fighting the urge to hide his face. Jack's voice dropped, softer but teasing. "For what it's worth, it was a good kiss." James glanced sideways, lips curving despite himself. "Yeah? You think so?" Jack's eyes danced. "Could use a bit more practice, though." James's mouth fell open. "You cheeky." Jack burst out laughing, and after a heartbeat, James joined in, the tension dissolving into warm, breathless giggles that filled the quiet flat. Jack back in his room. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, one hand wrapped around his half-empty coffee mug, the other resting loosely on his thigh. The sheets were still crumpled, holding the ghost of the night before, the shape of James's body, the warmth of their limbs tangled together, the softness of that breathless moment when everything felt different but didn't need explaining. He stared at the floor. Last night hadn't been planned. That closeness, that comfort, it had just happened. Natural, easy, electric. But the kiss in the bathroom, that had been something else, a choice. And now the quiet was loud. He didn't know what this made him. He didn't know what it made them. But what lingered most in his mind wasn't confusion. It was how right it had felt. Like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, even if it scared him more than anything had in a long time. James lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. Towel-dried hair fanned across his pillow. His shirt still clung slightly to his damp skin, but he didn't move. His thoughts ran wild, too loud, too fast. The kiss. The bed. The way Jack's arm had felt around his waist like it belonged there. Like it wasn't something borrowed, but something James had forgotten he needed. He could still feel Jack's breath on his neck, the slow, steady rhythm of it against his back, the calm it brought, and then the chaos that followed. What does this mean? Why didn't I stop it? Why don't I want to stop it now? His fingers curled slightly on the pillow beside him, half wishing he could reach out and find Jack there again. Warm, real, steady. He closed his eyes and whispered into the empty air, "What are we doing?" But no one answered. Only the memory of Jack's lips on his stayed with him, soft, quiet, unforgettable. Jack, with Arjun, Jack sat under the shade of a tree near the student center, legs stretched out in front of him, arms propped behind his head like he was relaxing, but Arjun could tell he wasn't. "You've been zoning out for 10 minutes, mate," Arjun said, tearing open a muesli bar. "Is it the assignments or the mystery boy again?" Jack's head jerked slightly. "What?" Arjun smirked. "Come on, you're distracted, smiling at nothing, and eating cereal for dinner. Either you're in love, or you're being haunted." Jack let out a single, too quick laugh. "It's not like that." Arjun raised an eyebrow. "You've barely mentioned your flatmate lately. You two still hanging out, or—" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, we're still close. Closer, maybe. I don't know." Arjun said, voice thoughtful. "You've got that look." "What look?" "That I accidentally fell for my best friend and now I'm freaking out look." Jack tried to hide his grin but failed. Arjun didn't push. He just offered the rest of the muesli bar. "Whatever it is, don't overthink it. If it's real, it'll keep showing up." Jack took the snack, nodding slowly. It had kept showing up, in glances, in touches, in the way James breathed beside him at night. James, alone, reflecting. James stood on the balcony outside the apartment later that afternoon, staring down at the campus below, a blur of bodies and voices, people moving like they knew exactly where they were going. He didn't. He leaned on the railing, arms folded tight, the pale winter sun warming his skin. The kiss still hovered at the edge of his lips. The memory of Jack's arms around him hadn't faded. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back there, in that bed, in that warmth, in something he didn't yet know how to name. He wasn't afraid of the feelings, not really. He was afraid of changing because of them. But what scared him more was the thought of going back, of pretending he hadn't felt anything at all. He heard the front door open behind him, but didn't turn around, because some part of him already knew who it was, and that part wasn't ready to face it. The door clicked shut behind Jack, the quiet sound loud in the stillness of the flat. James kept his eyes on the campus below, hands gripping the cold metal railing. He heard Jack's footsteps stop behind him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of him, even without touching. Neither of them spoke. For a moment, all James could hear was the rush of his own heartbeat, the hush of leaves rustling outside, and the faint, steady breath he recognized as Jack's. Then Jack's voice, soft but unsteady. "Can we talk?" James swallowed hard, throat tight. He nodded without turning around. Jack stepped closer, their shoulders almost brushing. "I don't know what that kiss meant, but I know I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." James closed his eyes, a tremor running through him. "Me neither." Jack let out a shaky breath. "I keep thinking about everything, the bed, the mornings, the way it feels right when you're there." James finally turned, slowly, eyes meeting Jack's. His voice came out quiet, raw. "It feels right for me, too." They stood there, faces inches apart, the air thick with all the words they couldn't quite say. Jack lifted his hand, hesitated, then rested it gently at James's waist. James didn't flinch. He stepped closer instead, forehead dipping until it rested against Jack's. For a few long, quiet breaths, they just stayed there, bodies leaning in, hearts beating wildly. James whispered, voice barely audible, "I'm scared." Jack nodded, eyes soft. "Me too." And then, like a sigh shared between them, they melted into each other, arms wrapping tight, holding on as if they'd finally realized neither wanted to let go. Outside, the winter afternoon drifted into twilight, but in the quiet of the flat, the world felt small and safe. Just the two of them, breathing in time. They didn't know the quiet of their shared moment was about to be shattered by someone closer to one of them than the other, moving in just then, someone who would change everything between them.